one has to acknowledge that there's something uniquely pernicious, at least potentially, about religious beliefs, because they have the otherworldly variable, the supernatural variable, the you're going to get everything you want after you die, so this life doesn't matter issue. That allows for a kind of misbehavior that is especially
So it seems that the claim would be that if you put forward axiomatically your claim that God exists, then you can use that claim to justify whatever arbitrary atrocities your system might throw off.
Yeah, I guess the only point I was making there is that not all dogmas are created equal. I mean, some dogmas are on their face more dangerous and more divisive.
But what I'm curious about specifically is, because it seems to me that the dogmas of the USSR and the dogmas of Nazi Germany were as pernicious as any religious dogmas, and they may also share important features with pernicious religious dogmas, but it isn't clear to me from your perspective what those commonalities would be.
Well, so, I mean, in some ways you're recapitulating an argument I've made, and this is an argument that I would make against you were you to claim, as you have elsewhere, that atheism is responsible for the greatest atrocities of the 20th century. The idea that Stalinism and Nazism and fascism were expressions of atheism simply doesn't make any sense. I mean, in the case of fascism and Nazism, it doesn't make any sense because the fascists and the Nazis, by and large, were not even atheists. I mean, Hitler wasn't an atheist, and he was talking about executing a divine plan, and he got lots of support from the churches, and the Vatican did nothing to stop him, and fascism, as you know, coexisted quite happily with Catholicism in Croatia and Portugal and Spain and Italy. So, but even in the case of Stalin, what was so wrong with that situation were all of the ways in which it so resembled a religion. You had a personality cult, you had dogmatism that held sway to a point where apostasy and blasphemy were killing offenses. You know, the people who didn't toe the line were eradicated, and so to take a more modern example, North Korea is a religious cult. It just doesn't happen to be a one that is focused on the next life or supernatural claims of magic.
So what would be the defining characteristics of a religious totalitarian movement that would make it different from a non-religious totalitarian movement?
Well,
because there's aspects that are similar.
They're very similar. I mean, the problem is dogmatism. The overarching problem is believing things strongly on bad evidence. And and the reason why dogmatism is so dangerous is that it doesn't allow us to revise our bad ideas in real time through conversation. Dogmas have to be enforced by force or the threat of force, because the moment someone has a better idea, you have to shut it down in order to preserve your dogmas.
Okay. So the commonality seems to be something like claims of absolute truth at some level that you're no longer allowed to discuss.
Yeah.
So that's another point of agreement then, I would say, because part of the reason that I've been, let's say, a free speech advocate, although I don't think that's the right way of thinking about it, is because I think of free discourse, like the discourse that we're engaged in, as the mechanism that corrects totalitarian excess or dogmatic excess. And so I also think that systems of governance that are laying themselves out properly have to elevate the process by which dogmatic errors are corrected over the dogmas themselves, which is why I think the Americans are right, say, with regard to their First Amendment, is the process of free speech is the process by which dogmatic errors are rectified, and so it has to be put at the pinnacle of the hierarchy of values, something like that.
No, I think you and I totally agree about the primacy of free speech.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's another, fine. Okay, so then...
Wait, I think there's one point that we should just lock in our gains here. It sounds like what you're saying is that the reason to fear religious dogma is really on the dogma side and not the religion side, which at least leaves open the possibility that something could exist over on the religion side that doesn't have that characteristic, right? That often they travel in tandem, but that the thing to fear is not the religious belief, it is the dogmatic nature of the way it is conveyed.
Is that fair? The other way to say that is the only thing that's wrong with religion is the dogmatism. if you get rid of the dog, I've got no problem with the buildings and the music and the paintings and
Wait a minute. That's not a trivial point, and it's not just a joke, because the buildings and the music are very important parts of the religious process. And so I know there's a humorous element to that, but it's not like Sam is throwing out the baby with the bathwater there.
And to go further than that, I've got no problem. In fact, I'm deeply interested in the phenomenology of spiritual experience. So whatever experience someone like Jesus had, whoever he was historically, or any of the other matriarchs and patriarchs of the world's religions, that phenomenology is subjectively real. I mean, it's diverse. I'm not saying everyone's had the same experience, but there are changes in consciousness that explain both how religions have gotten founded by their founders and the experiences people have had in the presence of those people or by following their methodologies that seem to be confirming of the dogmas that grew up around those traditions. And my issue is that whatever is true about us spiritually, whatever opportunity being born into this universe actually presents as a matter of consciousness spiritually, that truth has to be deeper than accidents of culture and just mere historical contingencies. The fact that somebody was born in Mesopotamia and not in China and got a different language game. So whatever is true there has to be understood in universal terms about the nature of human psychology and the human mind.
Okay, so another thing that I wanted to just point out obliquely, and then I want to return to outlining maybe where we agree, is that one of the things that was really shocking to me, I would say, was my reading of what was originally Jane Goodall's discovery about chimp behavior, because there was this idea that was really rooted in Rousseauian thinking that the reason that people committed atrocities in the service of their group identity, let's say their tribal identity, was because culture had corrupted us. So it was a uniquely human thing. But then, of course, Goodall showed in the 1970s that the chimps at Gombe, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, would go on raiding parties, right? And so there'd be like 4 or 5 adolescent chimps, usually male, sometimes with a female in there. They would patrol the borders of their territory. If they found an interloper on the border, near the border, from another troop, even if it was a member of their troop that had emigrated, so to speak, and that they had some history with, they would tear them to pieces. And of course, that was shocking to Goodall, and my understanding is she had some trepidations about publishing it, although she did. But then that's been noted repeatedly in other forms of chimp behavior. So, see, I've been really interested in the commission of atrocity in the service of belief. And it's tempting to pin that, say, on dogma and then to associate that with religious dogma. I think that's all tempting. But the fact that chimps do it shows that it can't be a consequence of something like religious belief, unless you're willing to say that the reason that chimps commit atrocity in the service of their troop and their territory is because chimps are religious. And so they're not religious, and they don't really hold a secular totalitarian viewpoint, but they still act out the atrocity element that's characteristic of human behavior. And so to me, that makes the problem deeper than one of mere, let's say, surface statements about metaphysics.
Well, obviously the problem of primate aggression, which we've inherited along with the chimps, is deeper, or at least different, than the problem of religious violence or totalitarian political structures that get the worst out of people. So, we have these primate capacities that we have to correct for, and we're busily trying to correct for almost everything that we've been evolved to do. We don't like the state of nature for good reason, and virtually everything that's good about human life is born of our, I would argue, culture-based and highly intelligent and necessary effort to mitigate what is in fact natural for us. And there's nothing more natural than tribal violence, which of the sort that you're describing in chimps.
Okay, so then it also seems like we agree that the core element of tribal alliance, which would have its roots, say, in the chimpanzee proclivity to, or its analog in the chimpanzee, proclivity to identify with the dominance hierarchy of the troop, is something that's a source of the proclivity for human social aggression that's independent of its, at least independent of any obvious religious substrate. So there are other reasons for group belief and the commission of atrocity that can't be directly attributed to religious dogma.
Yeah, but I mean, and what most worries me about religion, I would say, I mean, obviously religion can channel these primate urges in unhappy ways. So you can get tribal violence that gets amplified by religious dogmatism, and that should trouble everyone. But it's not unique to religion. It's also nationalism, and it's racism, and it's all other kinds of dogmatism. But what most worries me are those cases where clearly good people who are not necessarily captured by tribalism per se, are doing the unthinkable based purely on religious doctrines that they believe wholeheartedly without good evidence. So you have the person who joins ISIS who wasn't even Muslim before they converted 16 months ago, and they go all the way down the rabbit hole to the most doctrinaire, most committed, most uncompromising view of just how you have to live in this world if you're going to be Muslim. And they join ISIS based on the idea that salvation only goes one way, and that dying in defense of the one true faith is the best thing that can happen to you. There's no question that there are individuals who have made that journey. In fact, there are individuals by the thousands who have made that journey. And there are far more benign versions of that. There are people who just waste their lives, I would argue, converting to whatever the belief system is, and just wasting a lot of time worrying about hell or worrying about the fact that their child is gay and the creator of the universe doesn't approve of that. And there are all kinds of suffering that strike me as truly unnecessary, born not of, again, ape-like urges, but ideas that any rational person would, if believed, would follow to that same terminus. I mean, the thing is, if you buy the fact, again, to take Islam as a current example, if you buy the claim that the Quran is the perfect word of the creator of the universe, never to be superseded by anything humanity does now or 1,000 years from now, that commits a rational then the exercise of human reason is bounded by this, I would argue, pathological frame, which leads to certain outcomes that should really worry us.
Okay. So let's take that claim apart for a minute, because that's not your claim specifically, the claim that you were describing. See, because that's really not the claim that religious fundamentalists make. The claim they make is worse than that, because they claim that the Quran, say, or the Bible for that matter, is the literal word of God. But more than that, they claim that their understanding of that word is correct, which means they conflate two things. Because you could imagine a situation where you had a book, and I'm not saying this is the case, it's an imaginative exercise, where you had a book that had all the answers, that was extraordinarily complicated. And so that when you read it, it wouldn't be obvious that you understood it, or perhaps it wouldn't be obvious that you didn't understand it either. But you're not going to be able to, you can't get an uninterpreted version of the book. And so the fundamentalist claim is far worse. It's that not only is there an absolute reality, truth, embedded in the book, but that their particular take on that absolute reality is the absolute take on that book. And so they conflate their own, they make an assumption of their own omniscience and then pass that off onto God, so to speak.
Except in their defense, and I don't often rise to the defense of fundamentalists, it's very easy to get there because some of the claims in the book are not at all hard to parse. In fact, so many of them can only be honestly interpreted one way. So to take, again, an example that will be not inflammatory to you, but makes the point, it just says that the remedy for theft in the Quran is to cut the hands off a thief. I mean, that is the unambiguous injunction. It's not an allegory. It's not. You have to indulge some kind of tortured interpretive scheme to avoid the the shocking fact that the creator of the universe thinks you should live this way for all time. And people like ISIS, this is my claim, it's just, most of what is in these books, and this is what worries me about those books because they can't be edited, most of what's in the books is clearly not the best that humanity is capable of in the ethical domain, or in the... So clearly, and this is true for morality, most pressingly, but it's true for science, it's true for economics, it's true for anything else that we are wise to pay attention to. It's like slavery is condoned in the Bible, in both Testaments, and in the Quran. There's no getting away from that. Now you can say, well, it's not the central thrust of any of these books, but if you go to the books and try to figure out what the creator of the universe wants with respect to the owning and needless immiseration of other people, right? He expects you to keep slaves, and he's told you how to do it. Don't knock out their eyes and their teeth. Don't take, if you're a Muslim, don't take other Muslims as slaves. But it's not an accident that the people who joined ISIS thought that it was absolutely kosher to take slaves, to take sex slaves, and they were even their use of their sex slaves was conducted as a sacrament, and that's not an accident. They were praying over the Yazidi girls before they raped them. So this is not unlike what many people expect. It's not that this doctrine is being used as a pretext for people who would otherwise do terrible things like take sex slaves and rape them. And so there's no net damage being done here by this belief system. No, these are, I would argue, in many cases, psychologically normal people who are simply convinced of the absolute veracity of these ideas. And in this case, the perfect example of Muhammad as the most self-actualized human who's ever existed. And what did Muhammad do? Muhammad took sex slaves. Then once you grant that, and this is where there's a tension between how we pursue the same goals. Like as we've just established, we have many of the same goals, but insofar as you make religion look palatable, insofar as you suggest to your audience that they can have their religious cake and eat it too, they can have their reason, they can have their respect for science, they can have a 21st century worldview, but they can also hold on to everything they love in Christianity or fear to lose. And it's undoubtedly mostly Christianity, but whatever, any religion. My concern is that it keeps us shackled to these Iron Age philosophies and these Iron Age conversations where we should be having a 21st century conversation about everything, ethics included.
Okay, so